You know that iPhone in your pocket? Or maybe that IKEA bookshelf you spent a weekend building? Well, what if I told you they share a common ancestor, a radical, game-changing school in Germany from over 100 years ago? In this explainer, we're going to trace the story of the Bauhaus and see how its wild ideas basically invented the concept of design and, in the process, completely shaped the world you see around you today.
So let's just think about this for a second. When did being a designer actually become a job? Because for almost all of human history, it just wasn't a thing. The person who thought up a chair was the same person who chopped the wood and put it all together. The thinking and the doing were all part of the same process. But then, the Industrial Revolution happened, and that changed absolutely everything. Suddenly factories were cranking out stuff at a massive scale, and a whole new problem appeared. Who's making sure all this mass-produced stuff is actually good for the people using it?
All right, so here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at what the world was like before designers. Then we'll dive into the Bauhaus revolution itself. After that, we'll see how its ideas literally went global, how design just exploded into all these new fields. And finally, we'll bring it right back to the world you're living in right now.
Okay, first up, a world without designers. You really got to get why this was such a problem to see why the solution that came later was so absolutely brilliant.
So picture this. In the handcrafted era, everything was totally integrated, right? The person with the idea was also the person with the skills. The design part and the making part were happening in the same brain with the same pair of hands. But the factory system came along and just ripped them apart. Now, you've got one group of people focused on making the machines run, another focused on the bottom line. But a huge piece of the puzzle was missing. Who's the advocate for the user?
And what happens when you do that? Well, you get a whole lot of junk. Seriously. The world was suddenly flooded with stuff that was clunky, awkward to use, and just plain thoughtless. There was this massive gap between how things were being made and how people actually lived their lives. Someone had to step in and fill that gap. And that someone, well, they'd become what we now call a designer. All right, so we've got the problem down, a world filled with badly made stuff. Now for the solution, and this is where things get really interesting. Let's talk about the Bauhaus revolution.
Okay, so the Bauhaus. This was not your typical stuffy art academy. Not even close. It was started in 1919 by an architect named Walter Gropius, and it was basically a giant, bold experiment. The whole mission was to smash the wall that had been built between artists and craftspeople. The goal was to bring them back together, to reunite them, to serve the new industrial world.
And their core beliefs were, for the time, totally out there. Form follows function. That was a direct attack on all the fancy, over-decorated stuff from before. It meant that the way something looks should be determined by what it does. Simple, but revolutionary. Then there was uniting art and craft, which was their whole reason for being. And this one is huge. Good design is for everyone, not just for the wealthy. And finally, they taught students to learn core principles, not just copy old styles. This was about creating problem solvers, not just mimics.
And the way they taught this stuff was just genius. Every single student, didn't matter what their background was, started in the same place, the Vorkurs, or basic course. It was all about getting your hands dirty, understanding materials, color, and form from the ground up. Only after you nailed that foundation could you move into a specialized workshop. And here's the kicker. You learned from two teachers at once, an artist for the theory and a craftsperson for the technical skill. It was that complete integration of thinking and doing, right there in the classroom.
And all of this is perfectly summed up in this one iconic phrase from its last director, Mies van der Rohe. Less is more. Now that doesn't just mean empty space. It means that by stripping away all the unnecessary junk, all the decoration, you get to the true, honest essence of a thing. You find a pure kind of beauty in its function.
Okay, so now for the tragic but kind of ironic next chapter. Modernism goes global. You see, the Nazis hated the Bauhaus. They saw it as subversive, and they forced it to shut down for good in 1933. But in trying to kill the school, they actually made its ideas spread like wildfire.
Because all of those brilliant teachers and students had to flee Germany. They went everywhere, and they took the Bauhaus philosophy with them. This is what became known as modernism, and you see it everywhere. In architecture, you get these clean, geometric buildings of glass and steel, like the UN headquarters. In graphic design, it led to these super clean, grid-based layouts with simple fonts, the foundation of so much graphic design today. And in the products we use every day, it inspired these stripped-down, beautiful, functional objects. Think about those classic Braun products that heavily inspired Apple's early designs.
But here's the thing about revolutions. They always lead to counter-revolutions.
By the 1960s, a new generation started to feel like this less is more approach was maybe a little too cold, a little too rigid. They started asking, hey, what about emotion? What about culture? What about, fun?
And that questioning just blew the doors wide open. Design stopped being just about making things and started being about designing experiences. With computers, suddenly we needed digital design. Then came service design, thinking about an entire process, like your journey through a hospital. That evolved into user experience, or UX design, which dives deep into how a piece of technology makes you feel. And today, we have fields like social design, where people are using these same tools to tackle huge community issues.
So let's bring this all home. This isn't just a history lesson. The DNA of that little German school is literally all around you, every single day, in ways you probably don't even notice. Seriously, just look around you. That clean, minimalist phone in your hand? Total Bauhaus legacy. The flat-pack furniture from IKEA that's functional and affordable, that's their good design for everyone idea in action. The clean, simple fonts you read on websites and street signs? Yep. Even open-plan offices and the foundation courses that design students still take today, it all traces right back to those core principles.
So what's the big takeaway here? It's that design, as a formal profession, is still incredibly young, barely a century old. And its real purpose was never just about making stuff look pretty. At its heart, design is a systematic way of thinking, a process for solving human problems, whether that problem is a wobbly chair or a confusing app.
You know, the Bauhaus was so powerful because it was a direct response to the massive problems of its time. It dared to imagine a better future and then tried to actually design it. And that legacy is more relevant today than ever before. We're facing our own huge, complex challenges now. So it leaves us with this question to chew on. If you were to start a new design school to solve today's problems, what would you teach?